Hello, stream. Let's get back into it. Chapter 27. They did not know what else to do, and so they made their way into the city and back to the academy. The dock gates stood open as constables had been summoned to inspect the corpse, and so they entered without trouble. Before they returned to the citadel, Theron took them to the inn where Lilith kept her extra room. Mako waited on the street as they ducked within. At the door to the room, she produced a key from around her neck, hanging on the same chain as Kikit's amulet. I had the key before, you know, she said, looking embarrassed and refusing to meet the eyes of either Eben or Caleb. Before we were estranged. She only recently gave me one again, in case we should need it for something like this. Of course, said Eben carefully. She let them in and showed them where Lilith kept extra sets of academy student robes. Soon they had changed, and Mako led them on through the streets. Curfew was a distant memory, and so he took them around the academy's east end to the groundskeeper's sheds that housed his secret entrance. I must cover your eyes, he said, looking at Theron and Caleb. Theron scowled. Why? I can keep a secret as well as the next. It is not yours to know, much less to keep, said Mako. It is bad enough Eben knows how I get in and out. No others need the knowledge. He tore strips of cloth from their sleeves and covered their eyes. He took rags from the sheds and tied them around their eyes, and then he and Eben led Theron and Caleb into one of the sheds. Inside, Mako had Eben turn around while he pulled a lever, and the secret way opened before them. The passageway was utterly dark, and Eben did not know how Mako could see, yet he must have been able to, for soon he opened the door at the other end of it, and they stood upon the academy grounds. I suggest you rest well, said Mako. Doubtless I shall see you all again soon. Thank you, Mako, said Eben. Though some things are unclear, it seems at least that this is all over. Mako gave him a hard look. I hope you are right, though I doubt it. He vanished, and Eben and his friends made their way into the academy. It was far too late to be wandering about the halls, but they encountered no instructors and soon had climbed the stairs to the dormitories. They stopped at Caleb's, where the common room was empty, for the younger children had gone to bed. A fire burned low in the hearth. Eben threw 2 more logs on, and then they sat in armchairs around it. I cannot fathom all that has happened, said Caleb. There seems no sense to it. Isra is dead, at least, said Theron. I can worry about the rest of it another day. Is she, though? Said Eben. That corpse was long decayed from seawater. We all saw it, Theron. Theron threw her hands towards the ceiling. What, then, does it mean? Has she been a walking corpse for the last month? We have seen her alive, and tonight we saw her dead. Mayhap you guessed wrong and thought the body more decayed than it was. Her clothes were rotten, and fish had begun to eat her, said Eben. Mayhap we are wrong in another sense, said Caleb. Mayhap the corpse was not her, but only someone who looks like her. You do not believe in such a coincidence any more than I do, said Eben. We have seen her, studied beside her, and even fought against her. We know what she looked like. It was her body. But then a thought struck him. Hey, what's up, Wordwin? And he straightened in his seat. Unless it was not, it could have been a weremage. Think of it. What if she mind-worded a weremage to look just like her, then killed them and threw them into the Great Bay? When the body was recovered, it would cast any investigation away from her. Caleb shook his head. That is not how therianthropy works. When the wizard dies, they resume their true form. But now it was his turn to look up in realization. What if the corpse from the bay was Isra and a weremage has been impersonating her? Theron looked at him with disdain. She has used mind magic against us, Caleb. How could she have done that if she were only a weremage playing a part? The boy's face fell. Of course, he mumbled. I should have thought of that. She has used mind magic against us, Caleb. How could she have done that if she was a weremage? No wizard commands more than one branch of magic. Oh boy. Am I going to regret clicking on this? Yup. Yes, I do. The boy's face fell. Of course, he mumbled. I should have thought of that. Eben ran the facts through his mind, but could think of none that made sense, and he knew, too, that he was less able to guess than his friends, for many ways of magic were still strange to him. Either the corpse was Ezra's or it was not. They could not hope to guess at the truth, but either answer brought another more urgent question. Where was Aaron? If Ezra was still alive, doubtless she had held the boy in captivity, but if Ezra was indeed dead, was the boy now a captive of the family Aaron, or had she left him somewhere else entirely? Thoughts of Aaron brought thoughts of Zane, and his blood went cold. One thing is certain, he said at last, speaking quietly against the crackling fire in the hearth. There will be an investigation now, and we are the only ones who claim to have seen Ezra since she disappeared. They all looked at each other. Then Theron rose from her chair and left without a word, making for the halls. Caleb left a moment later, stepping through the opposite door that led to his dormitory, but Eben sat there until morning, staring into the fire, exhausted beyond reckoning, and yet unable to even think of sleep. It did not take long for the faculty to redouble their investigation. Eben guessed that news must have reached the academy during the night, for the moment he reached parents' class she commanded him to visit the dean. There was no instructor in the hall to walk with him, and so Eben stood there for a moment, frozen by indecision. He had a tremendous urge to turn the other way, to make for the academy's front doors and leave forever, begging for help from Halab and Mako. They could whisk him away to some forgotten kingdom, or even mayhap home to Idris, there to be hidden from all knowledge. But after a while he turned to the right instead and made his slow way towards Zane's study. He had done nothing wrong, or at least nothing wrong when it came to Ezra. He had seen her within the academy. He and his friends had not drowned her in the Great Bay weeks ago. He must cling to that, for it was, in fact, the truth. And only the truth could save him now, because outside of what he had seen with his own eyes, he was not even certain what the truth was. Zane stood outside his office, but much to Eben's relief, Gia was also there, as was Dasko. Dasko looked somewhat worse for wear. His face was still gaunt and his eyes roved all about, but his hands were steady, and Eben saw no trace of madness in him, the sickness that came over those who had long been under mindward. It had faded in him remarkably fast. Eben nodded to the instructor and received a brief jerk of the head in return. "Drayden," said Zane, speaking through gritted teeth, "come with us." He stalked off down the hall. Gia and Dasko followed at a somewhat more sedate pace, with Gia holding out an arm to help Dasko along. Eben decided to match their steps rather than Zane's, and soon the dean was forced to slow. Eben had had scant reason to visit the Academy's healing ward before, but that was where they turned their steps now. It lay on the bottom floor of one of the Citadel's great wings, the one that stretched west, and there were many beds arranged in rows with tall windows that stretched from waist height almost to the ceiling. Lots of stretching. With tall windows that reached from waist height almost to the ceiling. One of the beds nearest the entrance was covered, and Eben saw the shape of a body beneath it. He could smell decay mixed with seawater. Gia paused a respectful distance away, but Zane pushed forwards, and ignoring the healer who stood by to help, he threw back the sheet to reveal Ezra's bloated corpse. Removed from the seawater, her skin had turned darker still, and her eyes had swollen into pale, milky globes, the color of which could hardly be discerned. Yet it was still clearly her, as any fool could see. She had been stripped of her clothes and cleaned up, but still the sight of her almost made Eben retch. "How is it possible," said Zane, "that Ezra lies dead before us when you said you saw her less than 2 weeks ago?" His words were calm, but Eben heard the fire burning behind them, hot enough to melt steel. Gotta check my timeline on that. I think that phrasing is wrong. Okay, 30 Martis. Yeah, just over a week ago is more correct. His words were calm, but Evan heard the fire burning behind them, hot enough to melt steel. Evan swallowed hard, trying to remember to look shocked, as though he was surprised to see Ezra dead. It was not difficult, and he thought the paleness of his skin likely helped. I do not know, he said. Where was she? Maybe perhaps she died just after we encountered her. The healer, a wizened old woman whose hair was drawn up into a tight bun, shook her head. This corpse has been in the ocean a month at least, she said. We inspected it most thoroughly. Zane stalked around the bed to loom over him. A month. A month ago is about the time she vanished from her classes. And so I ask again, how is it possible that you saw her in the kitchen, Straden? He's not the only one who saw her, said Gia. I'm speaking to the boy, for it is his words that have been called into question. He can speak for himself, or he can speak with the mystic's encouragement. It matters little to me. She speaks the truth, said Eben. It is as Gia said Eben, feeling somewhat indignant now. I have not gone mad. My friend saw her as well. Zane glanced over his shoulder. Mayhap, yet they too may prove false. Eben heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Caleb and Theron being ushered into the room by an instructor he did not recognize. Both their eyes fixed at once upon the corpse on the bed. Caleb went elf-white and Theron did not look much better. This is the body of a girl you both said you saw here in the academy, Zane told them, yet she has been dead for weeks. How do you explain this? I cannot read the tale of it unless someone in this room has been lying. Caleb tore his eyes away from Ezra at last to meet Zane's gaze. If someone has been lying, it is not I. Not in this. We saw her. Theron fought her. Yet I thought you said her eyes were black, said Zane, and his baleful gaze turned to Theron. How could you resist a wizard with the strength of mage stones? It is as I said before, said Theron carefully. We surprised her. I tried to flee, but she turned and ran first. Clearly there is something at work here, said Gia, her voice calm and measured and her eyes going too often to Zane. I am certain the three of you can understand how we would be confused, concerned even. After all, the body cast doubt upon this whole affair. Evan steeled himself. They stood on the brink of the hearth now, and it seemed their only course was to plunge headlong into the flames. Of course, instructor. Yet I can offer no better explanation. And after all, someone had you under mind ward, did they not? And you as well, Instructor Dasco, for longer. Theron tensed. Zane saw her sudden discomfort and his eyes locked upon her. But Ezra is not the only mind mage at the academy, he said. Feigning surprise, Evan looked at Theron. You mean to insinuate that Theron had something to do with the mind word? I am only recently acquainted with magic, and nowhere near so mighty in my lore as anyone else present. An understatement if ever there was one, Zane spat. Evan's nostrils flared, but he pressed on, though anger now burned in his breast. But even I know that mind word is only possible with mage stones, and if Theron had been using mage stones, her eyes would glow black. Theron, cast a spell. She looked at him uneasily, but a moment later he saw her focus, reaching for her magic. Her eyes glowed white, and a nearby tray lifted into the air. There you have it. Theron has eaten no more mage stones than I have, or you yourself, Dean, said Eben, chuckling. You dare to laugh, roared Zane. Eben flinched as the dean stepped up to him, but he did not seize Eben's robes nor reach for his magic. He only loomed, his face a finger from Eben's, until Eben wanted to wilt and sink into the floor. My son has been kidnapped. My son, you mewling, dung-licking coward, and you dare to laugh? First I am told that this girl Ezra stole him away. Then you tell me that you saw her but did not stop her before she escaped. Now I see her corpse, and she has been dead, it seems, since she was supposed to have taken him. Laugh again. Laugh, I implore you, for it may very well break me, but I will take you with me when I shatter. Evan fought to reply, but pure terror had seized him. It was all he could do not to flee, and suddenly he had a desperate need for the privy. Everyone in the room stood frozen. But it was Dasco who stepped forwards at last, still shaky on his feet, but with a stern look in his eyes. He put a gentle hand on Zane's shoulder. Dean Foradar, he said quietly, no one can begrudge you your wrath nor your grief, which must be boundless in equal measure. These children are as confused as we are, certainly, and far more frightened, for to their mind they have seen a walking corpse. Evan was flippant in a moment of foolishness. That does not mean he is evil. The instructor's words were gentle, his tone soothing, but Zane did not subside. Rather, Evan saw his eyes go wide. He took a step back as though he was regrouping, collecting himself. A walking corpse, he whispered. He turned stark eyes on Ezra's body. A walking corpse. Evan knew not what the words, "Oh, hey, Miak! Rhea! 3 streams in one day. Yes, correct. Yay! I have survived XCOM, at least so far." Yeah, it's been an interesting day. I'm going to be getting glasses soon, which is just weird. Eben knew not what the words meant, but what dark things Zane thought he had discovered, but it only increased his fear. Gia stepped forwards into the sudden awkward silence. They should return to class, Dean Fordar, unless we have anything more for them. Zane did not answer. He only turned back towards the body upon the bed. Out with you, said Gia quickly, brushing them away. They made for the door. She followed them out and around the corner where she stopped them. Eben was reminded of the last time she had pulled him aside to speak privately when they had been caught sneaking into the Academy's vaults. I tire of repeating myself, she said ruefully, but I must ask you to forgive the Dean. None of us can imagine the pain of losing a son. Of course, Instructor, said Caleb politely. Theron only stared off into nothing while Eben was still thinking of Zane's look of dark recognition. I know he is angry with you, and anger may not always prompt honesty, Gia went on, so I will ask you once more. Is there anything else you know or have seen that could help? I am afraid there is little hope Aaron is still alive, for we have heard nothing from his captors since he was taken, yet we must cleave to what little hope remains. Is it up now? Son of a bitch. I don't actually know what's wrong with it. I checked my web hosting account and it looks fine, so I actually have to call them tomorrow. I meant to call them today, but I had a whole metric fuck ton of shit I had to do. So annoying. That drew Eben's attention. Gia must not know of the ransom note Zane had received. That meant Zane had not told the rest of the faculty, but he only shook his head and muttered, "Nothing, Instructor, I am sorry." Caleb and Theron gave soft words of agreement. She sighed. "Very well. Then I have only one more thing to ask. Eben, please go and see Estrella immediately. I have sent word to Perrin already. She will excuse the two of you. You seem closer to her than most, and so she should hear of this from you." Eben balked, looking back towards the healing ward for a moment. I have no wish to tell her of Ezra's death, Instructor." Gia's eyes grew mournful. "Nor have I, Eben, nor has anyone. But would you rather she hear it from your lips, or as a rumor whispering through the Academy halls?" He hung his head. "From me, I suppose, but I do not wish for such a duty." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Eben. Your compassion has never been lacking, and that is why I keep my faith in you." That... They left her then and made their silent way through the halls. Eben wondered if his friends, too, felt the presence of the corpse behind them long after the healing ward was out of sight. Done chapter. Yum. 64% of the way through. Chapter 28. I'm going to set my timer because I have to go at 10 p.m., which is 38 minutes. Eben's steps grew heavier the closer he drew to Perrin's classroom, and when at last he reached the door, he stopped short. Lifting his hand to turn the latch seemed an impossible task. He very much doubted Estrella even wanted to speak with him just now, as withdrawn as she had become, and he had no wish to speak to her either with the news he bore. Then he thought of her sitting in the dining hall and hearing some whispered word at her elbow. In his mind he saw her turn at the mention of Ezra's name and ask a sharp question. He saw the harsh, emotionless mask of her face break down a piece at a time. Shaking his head, he opened the door. A few of the students looked up at his return, but Estrella was not one of them. Eben brushed past her and went to Perrin. The instructor looked down at him with sorrow in her eyes. "Instructor," Eben murmured, "Gia has asked me to speak with Estrella alone, if I may." "I think that is best," said Perrin. From the pain in her expression, she must have heard about Ezra and knew how hard Estrella would take the news. Together they approached her, and when they reached the front table, Perrin put a hand on the little girl's shoulder. So great was her size that the hand nearly stretched the width of Estrella's shoulders. Thank you, Nightbot. Estrella, she said quietly, you are excused for a moment. Please follow Eben outside upon the grounds. The two of you must speak. She looked up at Eben for a moment, her fingers still fidgeting with the flower she held in her hands. Her eyes were emotionless. I do not want to. Eben shared a look of confusion with Perrin. Come, Estrella, he said. It will not take long, but we must speak. I have something I must tell you. I do not want to hear it. Please, Estrella, said Perrin. It is good for us to speak of the things that trouble us, for otherwise they can fester in us like a sickness. Do you think I do not know that? Said Estrella, and grief sounded in her voice for the first time. With a sigh of resignation, she pushed herself down the bench and stood, going to Eben's side with a swish of her robes. Take whatever time you need, said Perrin, and Estrella, if you do not wish to return to class afterwards, you need not. Estrella shrugged and followed Eben from the room. He felt suddenly uncertain, even more than he had before. He would have expected fear or grief from Estrella before she heard the actual news, for all tidings had been dark of late. He did not know how to react to this sullen indifference. Let us step out upon the ground, said Eben. It is too stuffy in these halls. She shrugged and followed him out through a white cedar door. Outside, students were practicing their spells in the open air, and he quickly guided her away from them towards the hedges and the gardens that were free of any onlookers. Above, the sky shone bright in a clear sky, too clear and blue for Eben's liking. He was exhausted after a night of shadows and death, and now he was the unwilling bearer of grim news. Would that I were like Doran of old, and the skies changed to suit my mood, he said aloud. Then the day would not be so cheery as if it meant to mock me. To his surprise, Estrella nodded. Often have I wished the same thing, but then we would be fire mages, and I must say that I prefer alchemy. Perrin would tell you to say transmutation, but I am not she. Yet you said it regardless, said Estrella. Though the words came out sounding harsh, she glanced up at him from under her wild frizzy hair and gave a little smirk. It gladdened his heart, but also pained him, for he knew the words he must say would tear that smirk from her lips and mayhap keep it away for good. It's down, word when it's not opening. Yay. Get it over with, he chided himself. Come, let us sit, he said, waving a hand towards a stone bench. She sat with him, staring at her hands in her lap as though her fingers did not fidget. Have you come to tell me that Isra is dead? She asked suddenly, even as he was taking a deep breath to speak. Eben deflated at once, and his mouth worked as he fought for words. She glanced up at him and must have seen the answer in his eyes. Who told you? Eben stammered. They should have let the word come to you from the right lips. When words are sorrowful, it matters little who says them, she muttered, looking back down at her hands. But no one told me. I guessed it. What else could prompt you to take me from class and receive Perrin's approval to do so? It is not as though anyone else could have died. I have no other friends left. He knew she must break down at that, yet she did not. She only stared into the distance. Are you all right? He said, uncertain of what else to say. She only shrugged. Estrella, what do you wish me to say, Eben? She snapped. How many times have I told you not to ask me if I am all right? Do you think that Isra means nothing to me? She is my sister. Of course I did not mean that, he said quickly. I only mean I thought you might weep. No one could blame you if you did. She turned away again. What good will tears do? Mayhap I spilled them all for Credellin Valley, for they will not come now. Eben leaned over, trying to catch her gaze, but still she would not look at him. He saw the great bags under her eyes, dark and hollow, so like Isra's had been, and he saw how thin and spindly her fingers had become, and how gaunt and sallow her cheeks, and he wondered if she was eating enough. Mayhap grief and anger had taken such a toll on her body that no amount of food or rest could repair it. And then he remembered seeing eyes like hers before, and hands and cheeks as well, but he had seen them in a mirror, and they were his own, and that had been when Momen died. And suddenly he thought he understood her better. He reached out and put a hand on hers, and she did not pull away. I had a brother. Did I ever tell you that? He said. I do not like to speak of him. He died when I was very young, just your age, in fact. When I heard what had happened, I went into my room, where I remained for days while everyone waited for me to stop weeping. She turned to him, eyes flashing. I have told you already that I do not need to... Quickly he raised his hands in token of surrender. I do not mean that you should weep. For in truth I did not. Tears would not come. But that does not mean I did not grieve. I missed him more than I could imagine. It still hurts to speak of him, though I am no closer to crying now. That gave her pause. Her fingers fidgeted. You did not feel bad? Because you could not grieve? I felt terrible, he murmured. Sometimes I still do, but in time I learned that I could not blame myself. For we all face loss in our own way. If I could have spent less time in guilt, I would have. I suppose that in the end it was hard for me to believe that he was gone. I never even saw his corpse, for he was burned in the distant land where he was killed, and there too were his ashes scattered. Estrella looked down at her shoes. That is an ill thing. We do not always get to say goodbye, said Eben, and in truth I know it does not matter. If I had seen his body or been there when they burned it, he would not have heard my farewell. Sky above, even if I had been there when he passed and we had whispered our parting to each other, nothing would have changed. He would still be gone and I would still be here. Yet mayhap the pain would not be so great. I like to believe it would not. Then he looked at her carefully. What of you, Estrella? Do you wish to say your farewell? I could ask for it, and I doubt any instructor could refuse you, not even the dean. For the first time he saw tears in her eyes, though she was quick to blink them away. She shook her head quickly. No, you wish you could have spent less time in mourning, do you not? Mayhap seeing your brother would have helped you, but I do not think that seeing Isra would help me. Rather, it would make things worse. You had no choice in the matter, but I do. He nodded. Very well. Your words are wise beyond your years, but then that is no great surprise to those of us who must suffer in class beside you, always overshadowed by your wit. She glanced at him, and he gave her a sad smile. She did not return it, but her eyes softened, and she shook her head disdainfully. Do not be an idiot, Eben. Do not be an idiot, Eben. As well tell the sun not to shine, and we know already that that is futile. Will you walk with me? If you want me to, she said, but he could hear the gratitude that lay beneath her words, and she leapt up to follow him with surprising eagerness, and the day's beauty no longer seemed so offensive as they strolled along. Chapter 28 done, and we're 66% of the way through. Chapter 29. The midday meal passed silently for Eben and his friends, for they did not find themselves much in the mood for talking. Together they made their way through the halls towards the library and wordlessly climbed the stairs to their nook on the third level. As they reached their armchairs, Eben saw a note resting upon one of them, the one upon which he usually sat. It was only a brief scrawl. "Come to Levin's Tavern tonight." Eben looked it over and then met the eyes of his friends. It must be from Mako. "Truly? Do you think so?" said Theron in mock surprise, her eyes wide. Soft footsteps made them fall silent, and they turned to look behind them. Eben froze where he stood. It was Lilith, hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes shifting uneasily as she tried to avoid their gazes. "Good day," she said quietly. For a moment no one answered her, nor even moved. Then Eben and Theron had the same thought at the same time, and both leapt towards his armchair to turn it about. But they ran into each other instead, and both stepped back awkwardly. I will fetch another," said Theron quickly. "Of course. Here," said Eben, waving Lilith down into the chair. She took her seat, still not meeting his eyes, while Theron fetched another armchair and placed it beside Lilith, but she sat in it instead of offering it to Eben, so he was forced to take her armchair instead. Caleb had stood in silence, gawking at the proceedings with wide eyes, and it was only after all the other three had seated themselves that he started, as if waking from a dream, and took his own chair. For a long moment silence reigned as they all looked at Lilith in the lamplight, and she tried to avoid looking back at them. "Where's Nella?" said Eben, desperate to break the stiffness that had settled over them like a sheet of ice. "We have opposite study schedules," said Lilith. "Ah!" Again a long quiet stretched. Eben's fingers drummed on the arms of his chair. At last Lilith cleared her throat. "Well," she said quietly, "I suppose there's no use trying to pretend that this is not very strange for all of us." Theron let out a hysterical bark of laughter, too loud and too high, and then fell silent. Eben quashed a snicker. Caleb only frowned. "Did you, and understand that I do not mean you are not welcome, but did you come to us for any particular purpose?" Lilith nodded. "I had heard what happened to Isra," she said. "Is it true that the three of you saw her corpse?" Eben met eyes with his friends, hoping they all knew better than to say anything of the events that had transpired the night before. "We did," he said. "Is it true she is long dead?" said Lilith. "That is what the rumors are saying." "That is true," said Eben, "though we are not sure how." "Because you saw her living less than 2 weeks ago," said Lilith, nodding. "How can that be?" "We have an idea," said Theron, sitting up. "Because you saw her living a little more than a week ago," said Lilith, nodding. "How can that be?" "We have an idea," said Theron, sitting up. "Theron," said Eben. She glared. "Lilith has not betrayed your trust this far, Eben, and mayhap she will have an idea for how Isra did it that we have not yet thought of." Lilith leaned forward to listen, and Theron went on. "I have never heard of magic that could do something of this sort. My first thought was therianthropy, but if the corpse were a weremage, it would not look like Isra. And if it had been a weremage in the kitchens, they would not have had mind magic to battle me," said Lilith. Theron slumped in her chair. "That is just what we said." Lilith frowned, looking into her lap. For a moment Eben hoped beyond hope that she would in fact know how such a feat might be accomplished, but when she lifted her gaze she only shook her head. "I have no idea how it might have been done. I am sorry." "It is hardly your fault," said Theron with a small smile. Lilith returned it. Caleb grimaced. A thought struck Eben, and he worked it around until he had thought of a question that seemed to pose no danger. "Lilith, have you heard aught of Gregor since last we sought him out?" Lilith's mood darkened, and she shook her head. "I have not exactly anyway. But something happened upon the seat just last night." "I have not exactly anyway, but something happened upon the seat just last night. A fear has spread throughout my family again, just as it did when the seat was attacked and the High King suspected us of being complicit. Now our terror is not so great, but it has certainly returned. I will try to reach out to Farah again and see if she knows what happened. And we will ask Mako," said Theron, giving Eben a meaningful look. He thought he understood. They must keep up appearances that they knew no more than Lilith did. "Will you see him soon?" said Lilith. "Mayhap I should come. We could pool our knowledge." "No," said Theron at once. Lilith frowned. "I do not mean to—" Theron shook her head. "You are not the one who worries me. Mako would not be pleased to see you. You have been through enough already, and I would not bring you within arm's reach of that man, not for all the gold upon the High King's seat." That made Lilith subside, and she gave Theron a wry smile. "Are you certain? I wonder if you know how much gold that would be." "It is a large amount. I myself would not hesitate to have a meal with Mako if I could get my hands upon it." Theron smirked. "You gold bags. Your coffers overflow, and yet always you seek more." Lilith giggled, and it was a sound so foreign that Evan froze in amazement. She stood then and brushed at her robes. I should be going, she said. I have intruded upon your time long enough. It was no intrusion, said Theron. You could stay if you wished. I have studies, said Lilith. If you wish, said Lilith, looking down in embarrassment. Gia requires a dissertation from me. Mayhap another time. She stepped out between the armchairs, but as she did, Theron raised a hand and Lilith took it on instinct. They held each other only a moment, but their fingers dragged against each other as they parted, as though reluctant to let go. That night, the streets of the city seemed filled with a heightened tension, or mayhap it was only the fear in the hearts of Evan and his friends that made it seem so. Oddly, Evan was calmest of them all. Mayhap it was because he had faced so much danger already that he was growing inured to it. They breathed a heavy sigh of relief when they caught sight of Levin's tavern. Together they entered as quickly as they could and tramped the snow off their boots in the doorway. At the bar stood a broad man hidden beneath a black cloak, his hood drawn up. He turned at the sound of their entrance, though no one else seemed to pay them any mind. Evan saw the flash of Mako's eyes beneath the cowl. He came to join them at the customary table, a bottle of wine in one hand and 4 cups clutched in the other. He wasted no time on pleasantries. Darkness take this mind mage, bitch, he growled. Darkness take this mind mage sow, he growled. Theron sat up straighter, but he only sneered. Not you. I mean Ezra. I can find no trace of her. No trace but the corpse, you mean, said Caleb, which we already know is not hers, said Mako, growing angrier still. I can deceive the eye when I wish and remain unseen when I must, but even I cannot conjure my own corpse out of thin air, nor hide from every prying eye upon the seat. When at last I get my hands on her, I will flay her slow just for the inconvenience she has caused me. Is it possible you are jealous, said Theron lightly. You seem frankly obsessed with her skill at deception, Mako. The way the bodyguard's jaw clenched, Evan feared he might lash out at her, but he only tightened his fist around his cup until Evan could hear its wood squeaking. I find her cunning as troubling as you do, no doubt, said Evan, but we have another problem. We told the faculty that we saw her in the kitchens, and so the 3 of us had fallen under suspicion. I worry what that will mean for us, though of course we are innocent when it comes to Ezra. Innocent, said Mako with a cruel grin. That is an odd word for it, and not one I would choose. We did not kill her, is what he means, said Caleb, as Evan flushed and lowered his gaze. Well, only catching her will prove that, said Theron. Mako pounded a fist on the table. Yet that seems impossible. All right, night, Wordwin. Sorry, I probably missed you by, 7 minutes ago. My bad. Though our watch upon the academy has been ceaseless except for last night when I summoned my fighters to the sewers, but we know she did not infiltrate the academy last night, for we saw her below. She is not in any of the Erin's usual hiding spots, and she is nowhere else upon the seat, for I have eyes in every cranny. Mayhap she has used mind word to send false tales to you, said Evan. One of your spies might have seen her, but has been charmed into telling you they had not. Mako's eyes rolled so far back that Evan thought the bodyguard might faint. Oh, how clever of you to think of such a thing, Evan. If only I had thought of that immediately and taken precautions to prevent it. You should be the family's master of spies and not I. Theron leaned over. I believe he means to say that he has taken precautions against such a ruse. Evan scowled into his drink. It was only a suggestion. I do not need your suggestion, said Mako. I need your lover. A chill stole up Evan's spine, freezing him in place. He glared at Mako. Do not speak of her to me. She has nothing to do with this. Not yet, said Mako, glaring right back. But she must, or we are lost. Go to her. Tell her we need help beyond our own means. What are you suggesting? To you? Nothing. Evan threw back his cup of wine and stood, but the words will carry weight with her. Send them along, little Evan. Go tomorrow night. I and mine will watch your path along the street and ensure you come to no harm. Send word to me afterwards as soon as you can. He walked to the door and vanished into the night. Caleb and Theron stared at Evan in wonder. What was that about? Said Theron. Evan said nothing, but only stared into his wine, his heart thundering with fear. Chapter 30. 68% and maybe my last chapter, but we'll see. Chapter 30, Evan woke with guilt roiling in his gut. After seeing Mako, he had wrestled long into the night with his feelings. The last thing he wanted was to involve Adara again. His kin had brought her enough dangers already, and though she always reassured him that her contacts in the Guild of Lovers would not betray her, still he worried. Though he did not understand the message he was supposed to relay, he did not doubt he would feel even more uncomfortable about it if he did. His thoughts were in turmoil all morning, but at last, just before the bell rang for breakfast, he fetched parchment and a quill and scribbled a note to Adara, sending it along with Melly at the front door. Ezra's corpse still lay in the academy, and the investigation would not stop simply because he wished it to. If they did not find Ezra, it surely would only be a matter of time before the faculty found out about the amulet, and then they were all lost. The day's studies went by in a blur. Evan managed to keep up appearances well enough that Perrin did not bark at him for his wandering attention, and of course Caleb and Theron mostly left him alone in the library, for their thoughts were just as preoccupied. After dinner, he set off into the streets for the second day in a row, but this time alone. He looked all about him, hoping to catch a glimpse of a black-clad assassin haunting his steps, but he saw nothing and wondered if that should make him feel better or worse. Though the troubles that burdened him seemed crushing in their weight, he still felt a wash of relief the moment he stepped across Adara's threshold. Before Evan reached the top of the stairs, she was there, and he heaved a great sigh as she took him into her arms. The last of his anxiety washed away like soot stains in a downpour. "My love," she murmured, "I was overjoyed at your message, but now I wonder at its purpose, for I can see that a great many things weigh heavily upon you." "You do not know the half of it," said Evan, "but I can fix that. Come, there is much to tell." As quickly as he could, he informed her of all that had transpired since last he had seen her. She listened attentively, stopping him sharply when he left out a detail and threw the tale into confusion. And when he reached the end, he told her what Mako had said. He saw her olive skin go a shade lighter. "He used those words, did he?" she muttered softly. "Darkness take that man." "What did he mean?" said Evan. "I hear no special truth in the words, but he seemed to think they held one, and now it seems you feel the same." "Oh, he does not speak in some code," she said, "yet he knew that I would know what he meant." "How did he learn?" She shook her head and stood, going to the cabinet where she kept her wine and her mead. "Never mind that. I need something to wet my throat." "Do not... that is..." Evan paused, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Might I try some of your mead instead of wine?" She arched an eyebrow and gave him a little smirk. "Are you certain? It is an acquired taste. I doubt you will like it." He raised his hands. "How will I ever acquire it if I do not try?" Adara studied him for a moment and then shrugged before bringing the bottle of mead over to the table. First she poured into his cup, but only a little splash, and then nudged it towards him. "Try it. I would not waste a whole cup on you if you do not enjoy it." Evan lifted it to his lips and took a sniff. It did not smell bad exactly, but neither did it make his mouth water. He tilted the cup back. The taste that slid down his tongue and into his throat was both familiar and foreign, like honey without the sweet. Too, there were herbs and spices aplenty. As a Drayden, he could not help but pick some of them out. It was not entirely unpleasant, but neither did it set him at ease, the way the first good swig of wine often did. "Acquired, mayhap," he said, "but not awful at first blush, either." Adara seemed impressed despite herself. "Indeed, mayhap I should have expected as much from a man whose tastes are as cultured as yours." She smirked to let him know the words were playful, and then filled his cup nearly to the brim before doing the same with her own. Evan's second sip was better than the first, and made the more pleasant when Adara settled herself sideways across his lap, draping an arm about his shoulders as she met his gaze. "Now, tell me what hidden meaning I have brought from Mako's lips to your ears," said Evan. "I do not like that my family's man knows something of you that I do not." "Oh, but there are so many things you do not know about me, Evan, and so many more things I look forward to teaching you." Though her words were light and her tone more so, he could see the concern lurking in her dark eyes. It soon came out in a sigh. "Your man has learned, though I know not how, of a certain friend I have, a friend who owes me a favor." Evan's jaw clenched, though he tried to hide it. He inspected his cup carefully, feigning nonchalance. "Is your friend a client?" She let out a slow breath through her nose, and he could hear her trying to hide her annoyance just as hard as he had tried to hide his interest. "They are not. They are, well, I did them a favor once, long before I came to this life. I have waited many years for sufficient reason to ask that that favor be returned, but I wonder that I did not think of it before, for certainly I think they could be of help." "I would not have you waste your one chance on me," said Evan. "After all, I hardly think they could be more useful in finding Ezra than Mako has been." "You do not know my friend," said Adara, giving him a grim little smile. "You have said before that if anyone can find the girl, Mako can. That is not true. The truth is that if anyone can find the girl, my friend can." "But that is all the more reason you should not waste such a chance on me," said Evan. "I may not even need such help." "Yet you may," said Adara, "and if things go ill for you without such a favor, it could mean your life. That is something I cannot allow." She rose, leaving Evan's lap suddenly cool. From a cupboard she drew parchment and a quill, and when she had scribbled a message, she sealed it with wax, using a seal Evan had never seen before. But he could not catch a glimpse of its design before she whisked it away and down the steps. He heard her sharp whistle as she flagged down a messenger, and then in a moment she reappeared in the room. "I must get dressed for a walk," she said, "and so must you." "Now," said Evan, "surely you cannot mean to see your friend tonight. How can you know your message will find them?" It will, she said, and they will come at once. Have no fear of that. You must not be dressed in academy robes when we see them. I have some other garments that will do. She undressed quickly and made Eben do the same. When his hands wandered towards her, she smirked and slapped them away. She then bundled herself up in winter clothes and gave Eben an outfit of his own that was elegant without drawing much attention. As soon as they had laced up their boots, she went to him and took his hand and pulled him down for a quick peck on the cheek. You must promise that you will not stare over much nor act out of turn, she said. And you must not ask me any questions. Do you understand? Mayhap one day I can explain, but not now. Very well, he said. She caught his cheek and turned him to face her. She stared at him for a long moment. Promise me. He frowned. I promise. Why? What is wrong? Nothing is wrong, she said. But, well, things are about to become very different, for both of us. With one more kiss, she drew him out and into the snowy night. The afternoon now wore on, and the days were shorter besides, so Adara hurried as she led him along winding streets and alleys, for it would soon be dusk. Every so often he would take her hand, not out of need for guidance or the fear of losing her in the crowd, but simply so that he could feel the warmth of her skin on his own. They were making east now, in nearly the same direction where lay the Drayden Manor, but after a time they turned, on the main road that ran from the western gates to the east. They had long passed the academy to the south, and the High King's palace loomed close above them, when Adara turned aside and led him north a ways, through streets and alleys that grew narrower with every step. Soon they reached a little shop with a large red door where Adara paused. From its chimney wafted the smell of coals and the sharp bitter tang of molten metal. But this was no ironsmith. In the windows of the shop were set little trinkets and dishes of silver. Around back, Adara murmured, it would not do for us to be seen entering the front door, and my friend would prefer it that way as well, I think. To the shop's rear was a small door of plain, unadorned wood. Upon this Adara tapped thrice and then twice more after a pause. In a moment Eben heard scuttling footsteps within, and then the door creaked open. Into view came a thin little man, wild gray hair sticking out in all directions, and though the day's light waned, still he blinked at them as though a bright torch had been thrust into his eyes. Little Adara, he breathed. Sky above, girl, but it is good to see you. And you, Auril, said Adara. She bent to give the wizened man a kiss upon the cheek. Are we expected? I should say so, said Auril, shaking his head. He stepped inside, waving them after him. Between this and all the goings-on before the attack, I will be amazed if my heart does not give out before its time. Adara took Eben's hand and drew him inside. It took Eben's eyes a moment to adjust to the dim. When they did, he saw a small sitting room with a stone floor, warmed by a hearth with a metal grate for a screen. Mayhap a pace from the hearth was a low, modest table with 3 stools. One of the stools was occupied. Auril glanced at the figure who sat there, and then at Adara and Eben, and then withdrew from the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The figure rose. He wore a cloak of plain brown, but its unremarkable color could not hide the fine weave of its cloth, nor the work of the expert hands that had sewn its hem. The cloak covered no armor, but there was a sword at his waist, a fine thing, not the plain blade of a soldier. He lifted his hands to throw back his hood. Well-tousled, sandy hair showed a few strands of gray, and his eyes were keen as they took in Adara and Eben. There was something intensely familiar about him, but at first Eben could not place it. Then he saw the brooch that pinned the cloak together. It bore the royal seal. A palace guard, he thought, but then the truth came to him and his limbs shook. He fell to one knee and bowed his head. Your Highness, he gasped, his throat a desert. Lord Prince Aemon, son of the High King and presumptive heir to the throne, took a step forwards and inclined his head, but Adara did not kneel, only gave a deep curtsy, and to Eben's shock Aemon did not seem surprised in the least. Well met, son, but come and treat me no different than you would your friend Adara. Kneeling is all good for the ceremony of a throne room, but it seems a little grandiose for Auril's little parlor, would you not say? Bright teeth flashed in a grin, and Eben matched it without thinking. His heart stopped when Aemon held forth a hand. They clasped wrists, and the Lord Prince pulled him to his feet. Then, to Eben's growing wonder, Adara stepped forward. She kissed one of Aemon's cheeks and then the other, the way an Adresian greeted their close friend or mayhap lover, though she had said that was not the case, he reminded himself. Your Grace, she said, my heart is glad to see you again. My own mood is as I said it would be the last time I beheld you, said Aemon. Though I am pleased to be in your company, my thoughts are solemn, knowing you would not have called except at the utmost end of need. What troubles you, Adara? The same thing that troubles my friend here, said Adara, inclining her head towards Eben. On instinct, Eben ducked his head. The Lord Prince could not have gotten a very good look at him beneath his hood, and if Adara did not wish to speak his name, he would not speak it either. He knew nothing of the Lord Prince's politics, but would not be surprised to find that Eamon, like most of Underrealm, held no high opinion of the family Drayden. Well, speak on, son, said Eamon. We have all three of us wasted enough of a night that might be spent in merriment. Of course, Your Grace, said Eben, bowing still further. Your Grace. Of course, Your Highness, said Evan, bowing still further. His mind raced, wondering where to begin. I imagine you know something of the Academy murders? Eamon's countenance darkened at once. I do, he said softly, though her Majesty was quick to send her guards to the Citadel. I wish we could have done more, and done it more quickly as well. But the killer is dead now, or so they say. They say wrong, said Eben. She is alive. I do not know how, but she is alive and plotting further evil upon the seat. A corpse was found in the Great Bay, said Eamon, his frown deepening. How can she be alive if we know where her body lies? Eben quailed, for he could hear impatience in the Lord Prince's voice, but then Eamon put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Do not quiver so, son. You have not raised my ire. Only if what you say is true, it is very troubling, and it has darkened my thoughts. It is true, Eben insisted. I saw her, I and some others. It was not long ago, and when the corpse was found, they said it had been dead for weeks. That cannot be. She is out there somewhere and has found a way to deceive us all. But no one will believe us, and so we can find no help to prove it. I only want to ferret her out of hiding before she attacks the Academy again. Eamon paused, staring into the fire. After a time, he met Adara's gaze. Please, Your Highness, she said quietly. Trust him in this. Eamon looked to Eben, and Eben understood at once. Adara was in fact asking him to trust her. He thought the weight of her faith in him might press him into the stone floor. Slowly the Lord Prince nodded. Very well, he said. I have some agents who may be trusted. I will have them search for Isra. If she is upon the seat, they will find her, wherever she may be. Hope quailed in Eben's breast. Mako had been saying much the same thing for weeks, but then he realized that this was not another promise from Mako. This was the Lord Prince. Then Eamon shook his shoulders as though waking from a deep slumber, and his mood lightened. But so simple a request is nothing, Adara. You must not consider my debt to you repaid. Do not hesitate to call upon me again. Adara smiled. A small deed from a busybody weighs heavier than a great deed from the lazy, they say. They are fools if they call you lazy, said Eamon, and speaking of which, I am sure the two of you have further business to attend tonight, as I do myself. If we may... He gestured, and they hastened towards the door together. Once in the alley, Eamon made to go in one direction, while Adara and Eben headed in the other. But just before they all departed, Eamon stopped them with a raised hand and stared at it. Eamon stopped them with a raised hand and peered at Eben beneath his hood. It is good to see a Drayden on the side of right, he said softly. Such a thing is less common than one might hope. Eben swallowed hard, so Eamon had recognized him after all. He felt a fool for thinking he could conceal his face so well. I hope my conduct may always please your highness so, he murmured, and took a knee again. Come now, I said there was no need for that, said Eamon. Stay your course, Drayden. Though not all your kin may feel the same, I think you do your name proud. Prouder than any sense. He would have been your brother, would he not? Everything went still. Eben could not move a muscle. He even noticed that his mouth hung open, but he could not close it. Momen was a good man, said Eamon. A great one, in fact, and high in the estimation of many across the 9 kingdoms, though I would not guess that your kin have told you so. He deserved better than what he got. At last Eben's mouth worked, though just enough to croak, Thank you, your highness. But how did you... Eamon smiled sadly. Another time, I hope. Some tales are not worth telling if they cannot be told properly. And then he was gone, vanishing through the gently falling snow. Okay. Chapter 31. Chapter 30 done, and we are 72% through. All right, that's going to be it for me tonight. I will be back tomorrow morning. Oi, 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 oi. Oh, yeah. Time for me to go the heck to... Oh, no, I have one more thing I have to do before I go to bed. But then I will go to bed. But yeah, I am very tired. So that's it for me. I will be back tomorrow morning at the usual time, 8 a.m. Pacific. And we should bang out the rest of this book tomorrow pretty easily. So that's exciting. Yay, team. All right. Hope to catch you later, tomorrow maybe. And if not, another time. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. Bye.